So today's topic is understanding child behavior, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the work that you do specifically with toddlers. I think it's important for us to maybe zero in on that topic and really get a little bit more information on the work that you do and how you support families with toddlers. Before we jump into this topic, maybe I'd like to give you an opportunity, Sylvia, to really introduce yourself, the work that you've done, and maybe some of the trends that you've noticed over the last several years, given the fact that a lot of us have been under a tremendous amount of pressure with the pandemic, whether we have little ones, preteens, tweens, or teens.
Sure. A lot has changed, quite honestly, over the past 2 years with the pandemic. And I think what's really important to note is that something that I share with parents all the time is that parenting is really a journey and not a destination. And we're going to have obstacles uh, throughout the parenting journey, and that's okay, and it's to be expected. Parenting is also not about perfection, it's about progress. And parenting is very different for each family. And I think that people need to really embrace that as parents, that we're not supposed to be comparing ourselves with the Joneses or anybody else. We're supposed to be comparing ourselves to what brings us our family values and what we stand for, because we all rear our child differently. And that's okay as long as you feel confident and comfortable with the way that you're parenting and that your children are feeling nurtured and healthy and loved. I think that's really important. And I think, the foundation is what's really important as well. So in terms of, how I support families, is really helping them to understand why things are going the way they're going. I think one thing that's really important for parents to understand and for toddlers is that they're going to go through a bunch of different developmental milestones. So having tantrums and meltdowns is okay. And so it's understanding how to respond to those positively. That's really going to be a positive impact for the whole family. And that's something that I've seen pre and during and kind of, I'm hesitant to say post-pandemic, but it really does play a factor for sure.
So let's jump into the first question. Um, Maybe you can share about how, in general, how do you deal with challenging behavior from your child? I know we're kind of kind of zeroing in, pardon me, on toddlers this evening, but how, in general, do you deal with challenging behavior as a parent, and how would you recommend we handle that?
Well, one thing that I do with families when I'm first meeting with them is that I have an intake session with them so that I can understand a little bit more about the dynamics about when the behaviors are happening, how frequently they're happening. Is it with a particular parent? Is it just at home, or is it in other environments as well? I think that before addressing how do we handle a behavior, we have to have a little bit more of an understanding, when do these behaviors transpire? And if we see a consistent pattern of these behaviors across different environments, then we know that we have to handle it a little bit differently. If we know that the behavior is strictly taking place in the home, and even more so with a specific parent, then we know that we need to zone in on that specifically and kind of see what's the why behind it, what's maintaining that behavior, and also how can we change it so that we can elicit a different response. So I think that's really important, is understanding the root cause first before we can even tackle the behavior itself. Because if not, the approach of how we handle it is going to be ineffective, or it's going to be very short term.
And I think that's important to kind of you want to kind of build a foundation first to understand, how you're going to support that family. We talk a lot about mental health. There's a lot of mental health that has come up to surface, especially even in young children. Given the pandemic, they haven't been able to socialize as much. Are there ways that you can help support a child's mental health and a family's mental health when you first meet them, or part of that intake process?
Absolutely. So the intake process is really important because, like I said, it really gives me a baseline of what's going on. Clearly, it's it's just a starting point. It's for me to assess the strength and needs of the child, but also the strength and needs of the parents as well. And I think that that's really important. While parents are often reaching out to me for a specific challenge that they're having with their child, I have to have a better understanding of the strength and needs of the parents themselves as a couple and as individuals, because there's certain parent individuals that, you know, they're good with one thing and another parent's better with another, and I want to play on those strengths, and I want to strengthen their relationship so that they can co-parent together with consistency. So clear expectations, consistency, and boundaries is what I promote when I'm working with families. Mental health component is something that I've always taken into consideration, but even more so during the pandemic. I've had a lot of people reach out to me because of increased anxiety, either from inside of things or their child having increased anxiety as well, depression, isolation, kids that were extroverts that are now turning more into introverts, lack of communication. So I assess those by probing parents with some more questions to kind of have a better understanding. Is this within typical norms? Is this what I consider a yellow flag that needs to be addressed a little bit further? Or is this a red flag whereby I think this need requires immediate attention from a medical professional like a family physician or so forth, depending on who their circle of care is. Mm-hmm. And then I would say that they need to tackle that first, and then we can work at the same time so that we can support the family.
We have had some questions that have been sent to us. Asks us, we are in the terrible twos. Do you have any recommendations for no behavior? Everything is no right now, it seems like.
Absolutely. So first of all, I like to switch the mindset, and instead of calling it the terrible twos, I like to call it the terrific twos. I think that if we change our mindset right off the bat, it can help us feel a little bit better about it. It is a developmental stage that all kids go through, and what's really important is understanding what is maintaining that. So if our child is consistently saying no to us, what's really important is start looking at what you do after the fact. So if your child says no and there's no follow through afterwards, then I'm sorry to share that you're maintaining that behavior to continue. Whereas if you empathize with your child and say, I'm sorry that you feel that way, or I understand you don't want to do that, but it's not an option, and following through with it, you are now shaping that behavior so that you don't have that escape motivated behavior, which is what it is in that case.
Okay. And I guess the viewer follows up and asks, you know, how do I positively and healthfully set boundaries with my toddler? And I think kind of you've alluded to that a little bit here. It's just about how do you handle that reaction, right?
Yeah, so it really depends. You know, for every situation, and specifically with toddlers, it really depends on what happened prior to that. What was the demand? Were you asking your child to move from something that they were really enjoying to do to something that they're not so keen on doing? Did you provide them with enough warning? Every child's individual, and so that's why it's very important to have those are all those kind of things that I capture within an intake speaking with families, because it's not just kind of dry, your child says no and this is what you're going to do. It really depends on a lot of different moving parts. So I'm not answering your question specifically because I don't have enough information to do so, and I don't want to lead you in the wrong direction. But what I'm going to share is that we do have to look at what happened immediately preceding that. And we also have to look at how are we following through afterwards. So again, with the no behavior, it's about providing clear expectations. It's being consistent with your language, and it's about establishing those healthy boundaries, which means that we're not allowing them to do other things when you've asked them to do something else.
You mentioned a little bit about how we handle change specifically. How do you introduce change in families? Maybe in families that are living together, but I'd also like to touch on, you know, families that are co-parenting. We have a lot of families that are divorced or are going through a divorce. How do you handle change, especially in the young ones under the age of 5?
So that's also very specific to the child themselves. It depends on how they typically adapt to change. So if we know that a child that has a hard time with change and transition as it is, and we need to prime them, which means that we have to either provide them with enough, well of enough advanced warning, or there's some children that you can't provide them with advanced warning because that would just elicit even more anxiety for them, right? They start worrying about all the ifs, buts, and what's can happen about it. So it can rise even more concerns for them. So I think what's really important is to first understand that. Once we understand that, then we would want to engage in a conversation with a child to give them. I'm going to step back for a second and just say that as parents, we tend to share too much information because we think that the more that we talk, the more that we share, the more that we change the way we frame something to our child, the more they're going to understand. But it's actually going to do the opposite. So what we really want to do is we want to keep it simple. Less is more in these kinds of situations because our kids are of that age, especially under the age of 5, you're not going to have their attention long enough for them to absorb everything that you're saying. And I refer to that as the Snoopy effect for all of those who remember Snoopy, when he just all of a sudden there's a lot of talking going on and there's not a lot of absorption that's happening on top of the doghouse. So we want to keep it short and simple and to the point. And then we want to make sure that we're not too quick to react to our child's response. Sometimes that can elicit even more anxiety. So if you see a sense of concern coming from your child, we're like, oh, I'm so sorry, like getting really animated about it, we really just want to keep it neutral because we don't want to feed into any negative emotions that they're feeling of potential anxiety or stress. We want to empathize and connect with them instead. So, okay, thanks for sharing that with me. I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, you know what? That's a really good question. If you have the answer, provide it to them. If you don't have the answer, you know what? That's a really good question. Let mommy think about it, and I'll let you know soon. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Providing that in a neutral tone, in a comforting tone, is what's really going to help. If they're up here with stress, and you stay neutral, you're modeling behavior, so they'll come down and meet your level. If we all of a sudden become very reactive and our kids are already reactive, you're going to stay at the reactive stage. So always try and keep it at a neutral tone and always try and to connect and empathize and then redirect as best as you can to whatever the situation that you're trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
And always validate your feelings is what's really important as well when there's a change as such of divorce or something like that. Always validate feelings and always let them know that it's okay to feel that way and that you can always come to mommy if you have any questions or concerns or whatever.
And let's talk a little bit more about anxious children and you being there as that neutral baseline for them, and then either coming to your neutral or you modeling that behavior. In the case of toddlers and then maybe siblings, an older sibling, and the child may be anxious for whatever reason. It may be school, going back to school, starting a new extracurricular activity or traveling somewhere. How do we handle it with siblings, especially as well? Because not everyone is an only child.
The question itself is how to support an anxious child when there's siblings involved as well.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so, if there is a child, say there is one child that is taking more attention away from the parent than the other, we always want to make sure that we compensate for that by providing one-on-one time for that other child. We also want to provide them with an opportunity to share how they feel or to even address it before it even comes up. So something along the lines like, hey, thanks for your patience. I know that I've been spending a lot of time with your brother right now. He's going through a hard time, but that doesn't justify me not being able to be here for you. Is there something that you need? They might not. They might be, oh, no, it's okay. But you checking in is that step ahead of there being a problem. Now, on the flip side, if we have a child that's anxious and then the sibling keeps on egging that child on, it's not really helping the situation, then we really need to address that with that child one-on-one and just in a neutral tone once again, because that's what's really going to be able to open the line of communication with children. It's like, when I'm speaking with your brother and you come in and state what is happening, that's really not helpful. And then redirect them. So when I'm with your brother, it'd be really helpful if you can X or Y, like go to your room or go play outside or give them something else to do, but not be in that room. So we can avoid the provoking from continuing and help them to understand why it's not helpful as well. And then that will also open up the lines of communication with that other child as well, so that they can express some frustrations and their feelings as well. Because if it's an ongoing matter, they might feel neglected, they might feel like it's unfair, they might feel like there is double standards, and we have to provide them with an opportunity to share that with us, rather than saying no, that's not happening. Don't shut them down, provide them with an opportunity to talk, because they're trying to express themselves and we need to connect with them at that level. We need to hear what they have to say, and then we need to respond to it.
A lot of the work that you do focuses on the child specifically and helping the child at various stages. Um, Sylvia, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the advice you have for parents specifically, and the advice that you might have for parents who are feeling really overwhelmed with handling challenging behaviors. They might have one child, they might have multiples, who are just really drowning them, especially during the pandemic and beyond. So let's kind of change our focus for the last few minutes of today's call and talk about kind of the parents and how you support them as well.
Absolutely. So to be clear, that when parents reach out to me, I'm working directly with the parent, not with the child. And so when assessing everything within the intake, I'm, like I shared at the beginning of this call, is that I get a better understanding of the family's strength and needs. And in working with the parents, we develop a better understanding together, and I provide a lot of insight as to areas whereby we can modify or make changes that will work to whatever their goal is that they share with me. So that's another thing that we get established during the intake, is what are your goals? I understand why you reached out to me? What are you hoping to gain by working with me? And together, that's when I create a tailored approach based on what their strengths and needs are, based on what the values and the beliefs that their family has in terms of parenting. That's when I start tweaking things to make it work for their family. Because ultimately the goal is that once you're no longer working with me, that you're feeling confident with the strategies that you're implementing, right? Because we want to spend time enjoying our family, not spending time stressing about what we have to do.
Right.
When working with parents, providing them with strategies that they feel comfortable with, that really pairs well with their strengths, then it's going to come natural to them eventually with practice. So what's really important is understanding where those stressors come from. That's a conversation that I do have from parents. It's like, and individually. So I speak to parent number one and then parent number two, and I ask them individually, because the stressors can come from different things that the kids do. And so we need to understand what that is, right? Mm-hmm. What stresses me out might be completely different than what stresses my husband out, or vice versa. And together there might be some things that are also very common. So I think it's really important to evaluate that. And I often get parents to have that conversation, especially after our intake, to think about it and create a lot of self-awareness, because self-awareness is just as important as the change itself. And so once we understand where the stressors are when it comes to parenting and the responsibilities of having a family, then mm-hmm. we can really look at what do we need to focus on first, and then we can start making the shift. Oftentimes, Julia, it's about parents getting a little bit more on the same page mm-hmm. in terms of consistency, so that one parent's not doing one thing and the other parent's unraveling it or saying the opposite, or vice versa. It's about providing those clear expectations so that there's no room for misunderstanding. And that just doesn't go between parent and child, that goes between parent and parent as well. And then also the follow through. So it's building that I always compare it to a house. I love analogy. So it's like building a house. You need to have a solid foundation before you can start building on it. So if you don't have those clear expectations, if you're not consistent and you don't have those healthy boundaries, that house is going to be wobbly and you're going to run into all kinds of problems after the house is built. So build that strong foundation, and then from there you can start building a lot more of routine and respect in the household and compliance and enjoyment. So there's so many great things that can come with it, but it has to start off with what do you want so that we understand where the problem is.
Incredible. Great advice. I think, Sylvia, you've been able over the last half an hour to really talk to us about so many different aspects, whether that be for the parents, whether that be for the entire family, how to handle just some basic behavior in young children and toddlers. I'm sure we could spend a lot longer talking about specific scenarios in children. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for joining us today, for offering this advice. And do you have any kind of last remarks you want to share with our viewers?
Honestly, the same thing that I shared at the very beginning, because I think that it's really important for parents to really embrace is that parenting is a journey. It's not a destination. Don't be hard on yourself. It's okay to ask for help. We get a lot of help until Talk Till Two, and all even up in the first year of life, everyone's offering their support, and then all of a sudden everyone thinks that you have all the answers by that point. You're not expected to have all the answers. I mean, there's a lot of different obstacles, so don't, the stigma of asking for help should just shelf it. Asking for help is going to support you and it's going to support your family. So don't feel bad to reach out by any stretch. And it's all about progress and not perfection. So do you and enjoy your family, because that's why we have kids, is to enjoy them.
A good reminder. So thank you so much again, Sylvia, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again very soon. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Julia.